Welcome back to Storywave. This is Eric, filling in for Michael this week. You are about to listen to part 2 of Poul Anderson's psychological sci-fi noir story, Sentiment Inc. Let's see what happens next.
It can be annoying to be constantly shadowed, to have a nasty gossip about you spreading through the places where you work and live, to find your tires slashed, to be accosted by truculent drunks when you stop in for a quick one, to have loud horns blow under your window every night. And it doesn't do much good to call the police. Your petty tormentors always fade out of sight. Fraser was sitting in his room some 2 weeks later, trying unsuccessfully to concentrate on matrix algebra when the phone rang. He never picked it up without a fluttering, small hope that it might be Judy, and it never was. This time, it was a man's voice. "Mr. Fraser?" "Yeah," he grunted. "What do you want?" "This is Robert Kennedy. I'd like to talk to you." Fraser's heart sprang at his ribs, but he held his voice stiff. "Go on then. Talk." "I want you to come up to my place. We may be having a long conversation." Well, it was more than he had allowed himself to hope for, but he remained curt. "Okay. But a full report of this business, and what I think you're doing, is in the hands of several people. If anything should happen to me..." "You've been reading too many hard-boileds," said Kennedy. "Nothing will happen. Anyway, I have a pretty good idea who those people are. I can hire detectives of my own, you know." "I'll come over then." Fraser hung up and realized, suddenly, that he was sweating. The night air was cool as he walked down the street. Paused for a moment, feeling the city like a huge, impersonal machine around him, grinding and grinding. Human civilization had grown too big, he thought. It was beyond anyone's control. It had taken on a will of its own and was carrying a race which could no longer guide it. Sometimes, reading the papers, or listening to the radio, or just watching the traffic go by like a river of steel, a man could feel horribly helpless. He took the subway to Kennedy's address, a swank apartment in the lower 50s. He was admitted by the psychiatrist in person. No one else was around. "I assume," said Kennedy, "that you don't have some wild idea of pulling a gun on me. That would accomplish nothing except get you in trouble." "No," said Fraser, "I'll be good." His eyes wandered about the living room. One wall was covered with books which looked used. There were some quality reproductions, a Capehart, and fine, massive furniture. It was a tasteful layout. He looked a little more closely at the 3 pictures on the mantel. A middle-aged woman and 2 young men in uniform. "My wife," said Kennedy, "and my boys. They're all dead. Would you like a drink?" "No, I came to talk." "I'm not Satan, you know," said Kennedy. "I like books and music, good wine, good conversation. I'm as human as you are, only I have a purpose." Fraser sat down and began charging his pipe. "Go ahead," he said. "I'm listening." Kennedy pulled a chair over to face him. The big, smooth countenance behind the rimless glasses held little expression. "Why have you been annoying me?" he asked. "I?" Fraser lifted his brows. Kennedy made an impatient gesture. "Let's not shop words. There are no witnesses tonight. I intend to talk freely, and want you to do the same." I know that you've got Martinez sufficiently convinced to help you with this very childish persecution campaign. What do you hope to get out of it? I want my girl back, said Fraser tonelessly. I was hoping nuisance value. Kennedy winced a bit. You know, I'm damned sorry about that. It's the one aspect of my work which I hate. I'd like you to believe that I'm not just a scientific procurer. Actually, I have to satisfy the minor desires of my clients, so they'll stay happy and agree to my major wishes. It's the plain truth that those women have been only the minutest fraction of my job. Nevertheless, you're a freewheeling son doing something like that. Really now, what's so horrible about it? Those girls are in love. The normal, genuine article. That's not any kind of zombie state, or whatever your overheated imagination has thought up. They're entirely sane, unharmed, and happy. In fact, happiness of that kind is so rare in this world that if I wanted to, I could pose as their benefactor. You've got a machine, said Fraser. It changes the mind. As far as I'm concerned, that's as gross a violation of liberty as throwing someone into a concentration camp. How free do you think anyone is? You're born with a fixed heredity. Environment molds you like clay. Your society teaches you what and how to think. A million tiny factors, all depending on blind, uncontrollable chance, determine the course of your life, including your love life. Well, we didn't waste time on philosophy. Go on, ask some questions. I admit I've hurt you, unwittingly to be sure, but I do want to make amends. Your machine then, said Fraser. How did you get it? How does it work? I was practicing in Chicago, said Kennedy, and collaborating on the side with Gavati. How much do you know of cybernetics? I don't mean computers and automata, which are only one aspect of the field. I mean control and communication, in the animal as well as in the machine. Well, I've read Weiner's books, and studied Shannon's work too. Despite himself, Fraser was thawing just a trifle. It's exciting stuff. Communications theory seems to be basic in biology and psychology, as well as in electronics. Quite. The future may remember Weiner as the Galileo of neurology. If Gavati's work ever gets published, he'll be considered the Newton. So far, frankly, I've suppressed it. He died suddenly, just when his machine was completed, and he was getting ready to publish his results. Nobody but I knew anything more than rumors. He was inclined to be secretive till he had a fait accompli on his hands. I realized what an opportunity had been given me, and I took it. I brought the machine here without saying much to anyone. Kennedy leaned back in his chair. I imagine it was mostly luck which took Gavati and me so far, he went on. We made a long series of improbably good guesses, and thus telescoped a century of work into a decade. If I were religious, I'd be down on my knees, thanking the Lord for putting this thing of the future into my hands. Or the devil, said Fraser. Briefly, anger flitted across Kennedy's face. I grant you, the machine is a terrible power, but it's harmless to a man if it's used properly, as I have used it. I'm not going to tell you just how it works. To be perfectly honest, I only understand a fraction of its theory and its circuits myself. But look, you know something of encephalography. The various basic rhythms of the brain have been measured. The standard method is already so sensitive that it can detect abnormalities like a developing tumor or a strong emotional disturbance that will give trouble unless corrected. Half of Gravati's machine is a still more delicate encephalograph. It can measure and analyze the minute variations in electrical pulses corresponding to the basic emotional states. It won't read thoughts, no. But once calibrated for a given individual, it will tell you if he's happy, sorrowful, angry, disgusted, afraid, any fundamental neuroglandular condition, or any combination of them. He paused. "All right," said Fraser. "What else does it do?" "It does not make monsters," said Kennedy. "Look, the specific emotional reaction to a given stimulus is, in the normal individual, largely a matter of conditioned reflex, instilled by social environment, or the accidental associations of his life. Anyone in decent health will experience fear in the presence of danger, desire in the presence of a sexual object, and so on. That's basic biology, and the machine can't change that. But most of our evaluations are learned. For instance, to an American, the word mother has powerful emotional connotations, while to a Samoan, it means nothing very exciting. You had to develop a taste for liquor, tobacco, coffee, in fact, most of what you consume. If you're in love with a particular woman, it's a focusing of the general sexual libido on her, brought about by the symbolizing part of your mind. She means something to you. There are cultures without romantic love, you know, and so on. All these specific, conditioned reactions can be changed. How? The encephalographic part of the machine measures the exact pulsations in the individual corresponding to the various emotional reactions. It takes me about 4 hours to determine those with the necessary precision. Then I have to make statistical analyses of the data to winnow out random variations. Thereafter, I put the subject in a state of light hypnosis. That's only to increase suggestibility and make the process faster. As I pronounce the words and names I'm interested in, the machine feeds back the impulses corresponding to the emotions I want, a sharply focused beam on the brain center concerned. For instance, suppose you were an alcoholic and I wanted to cure you. I'd put you in a hypnosis and stand there whispering wine, whiskey, beer, gin, and so on. Meanwhile, the machine would be feeding the impulses corresponding to your reactions of hate, fear, and disgust into your brain. You'd come out unchanged, except that your appetite for alcohol would be gone. You could, in fact, come out hating the stuff so much that you'd join the Prohibition Party, though in actual practice, it would probably be enough to just give you a mild aversion. I see. Maybe. Fraser scowled. And the subject doesn't remember what you've done? Oh no. It all takes place on lower subconscious levels. A new set of conditioned neural pathways is opened, you see, and the old ones are closed off. The brain does that by itself, through its normal symbolizing mechanism. All that happens is that the given symbol, such as liquor, becomes reflectively associated with a given emotional state, such as dislike. Kennedy leaned forward with an air of urgency. The end result is in no way different from the ordinary means of persuasion. Propaganda does the same thing by sheer repetition. If you're courting a girl, you try to identify yourself in your mind with the things she desires by appropriate behavior. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have used that example. The machine is only a direct, fast way of doing this, producing a more stable result. It's still tampering, said Fraser. How do you know you're not creating side effects, doing irreparable long-range damage? Oh, for Lord's sake, exploded Kennedy. Take your mind off that shelf, will you? I've told you how delicate the whole thing is. A few microwatts of power, more or less, a frequency shift of less than 1%, and it doesn't work at all. There's no effect whatsoever. He cooled off fast, adding reflectively, on the given subject, that is. It might work on someone else. These pulsations are a highly individual matter. I have to calibrate every case separately. There was a long period of silence. Then Fraser strained forward and said in an ugly voice, "All right, you've told me how you do it. Now tell me why. What possible reason or excuse other than your own desire to play God? This thing could be the greatest psychiatric tool in history, and you're using it to pimp." "I told you that was unimportant," said Kennedy quietly. "I'm doing much more. I set up practice here in New York a couple of years ago. Once I had a few chance people under control. No, I tell you again, I didn't make robots of them. I merely associated myself in their minds with the father image. That's something I do to everyone who comes into the machine. Just as a precaution, if nothing else. Kennedy's all-wise, all-powerful. Kennedy can do no wrong. It isn't a conscious realization. To the waking mind, I am only a shrewd advisor and a damn swell fellow. But the subconscious mind knows otherwise. It wouldn't let my subjects act against me. It wouldn't even let them want to. Well, you see how it goes. I got those first few people to recommend me to certain selected friends. And these in turn recommended me to others. Not necessarily as a psychiatrist. I have variously been a doctor, counselor, or merely a research man looking for data. But I'm building up a group of the people I want. People who will back me, who will follow my advice, not with any knowledge of being dominated, but because the workings of their own subconscious minds will lead them inevitably to think that my advice is the only sound policy to follow, and my requests are things any decent man must grant." "Yeah," said Fraser, "I get it. Big businessmen, labor leaders, politicians, military men, and Soviet spies." Kennedy nodded. "I have connections with the Soviets. Their agents think I'm on their side. But it isn't treason, though I may help them out from time to time. That's why I have to do these services for my important clients, such as getting them the women they want, or what I actually do more often, influencing their competitors and associates. You see, the subconscious mind knows I am all-powerful, but the conscious mind doesn't. It has to be satisfied by occasional proofs that I am invaluable. Otherwise, conflicts would set in, my men would become unstable, and eventually psychotic, and be of no further use to me." "Of course," he added almost pedantically, "my men don't know how I persuade these other people. They only know that I do, somehow. And their regard for their own ego, as well as for me, sets up a block which prevents them from reasoning out the fact that they themselves are dominated. They're quite content to accept the results of my help, without inquiring further into the means than their easy rationalization that I have a persuasive personality. I don't like what I'm doing, Fraser, but it's got to be done." "You still haven't said what's got to be done," answered the engineer coldly. "I've been given something unbelievable," said Kennedy. His voice was very soft now. "If I'd made it public, can you imagine what would have happened? Psychiatrists would use it, yes, but so would criminals, dictators, power-hungry men of all kinds. Even in this country, I don't think libertarian principles could long survive. It would be too simple. And yet it would have been cowardly to break the machine and burn Gavati's notes. Chance has given me the power to be more than a chip in the river. A river that's rapidly approaching a waterfall. War, destruction, tyranny. No matter who the Pyrrhic victor may be. I'm in a position to do something for the causes in which I believe. And what are they? Asked Fraser. Kennedy gestured at the pictures on the mantel. Both my sons were killed in the last war. My wife died of cancer, a disease which would be licked now if a fraction of the money spent on armaments had been diverted to research. That brought it home to me. But there are hundreds of millions of people in worse cases. And war isn't the only evil. There is poverty, oppression, inequality, want, and suffering. It could be changed. I'm building up my own lobby, as you might say. In a few more years, I hope to be the indispensable advisor of all the men who, between them, really run this country. And yes, I have been in touch with Soviet agents. I've even acted as a transmitter of stolen information. The basic problem of spying, is not to get the information in the first place, as much as to get it to the homeland. Treason? No. I think not. I'm getting my toehold in world communism. I already have some of its agents. Sooner or later, I'll get to the men who really matter. Then communism will no longer be a menace. He sighed. It's a hard row to hoe. It'll take my lifetime, at least. But what else have I got to give my life to? Fraser sat quiet. His pipe was cold. He knocked it out and began filling it afresh. The scratching of his match seemed unnaturally loud. It's too much, he said. It's too big a job for one man to tackle. The world will stumble along somehow, but you'll just get things into a worse mess. I've got to try, said Kennedy. And I still want my girl back. I can't do that. I need Snyder too much. But I'll make it up to you somehow, Kennedy sighed. Lord, if you knew how much I wanted to tell all this. With sudden wariness. Not that it's to be repeated. In fact, you're to lay off me. Call off your dogs. Don't try to tell anyone else what I've told you. You'd never be believed, and I already have enough power to suppress the story if you should get it out somehow. And if you give me any more trouble, I'll see to it that you stop. Murder? Or a commitment to an asylum. I can arrange that, too. Fraser sighed. He felt oddly unexcited, empty, as if the interview had drained him of his last will to resist. He held the pipe loosely in his fingers, letting it go out. Ask me a favor, urged Kennedy. I'll do it, if it won't harm my own program. I tell you, I want to square things. Well, think about it. Let me know. All right, Fraser got up. I may do that. He went out the door without saying goodnight. He sat with his feet on the table, chair tilted back and teetering dangerously, hands clasped behind his head, pipe filling the room with a blue fog. It was his usual posture for attacking a problem. And damn it, he thought wearily, this was a question such as he made his living on. An industrial engineer comes into the office. We want this and that. A machine for a very special purpose, let's say. What should we do, Mr. Fraser? Fraser prowls around the plant, reads up on the industry, and then sits down and thinks. The elements of a problem are such and such. How can they be combined to yield a solution? Normally, he uses the mathematical approach, especially in machine design. Most practicing engineers have a pathetic math background. They use 10 pages of elaborate algebra and rusty calculus to figure out something that 3 vector equations would solve. But you have to get the logical basics straight first, before you can set up your equations. Alright, what is the problem? To get Judy back. That means forcing Kennedy to restore her normal emotional reactions. No, he didn't want her thrust into love with him. He just wanted her as she had been. What are the elements of the problem? Kennedy acts outside the law, but he has blocked all official channels. He even has connections extending through the Iron Curtain. Appeal to the FBI? Kennedy couldn't have control over them yet. However, if Fraser tried to tip off the FBI, they'd act cautiously, if they investigated at all. They'd have to go slow, and Kennedy would find out in time to do something about it. Martinez could help no further. Swarovski had closer contact with Washington. He'd been so thoroughly cleared that they'd been inclined to trust whatever he said. But Swarovski doubted the whole story. Like many men who'd suffered through irresponsible congressional changes, he was almost fanatic about having proof before accusing anyone of anything. Moreover, Kennedy knew that Swarovski was Fraser's friend. He'd probably be keeping close tabs on the physicist and ready to block any attempts he might make to help. With the backing of a man like Snyder, Kennedy could hire as many detectives as he wanted. In fact, whatever the counterattack, it was necessary to go warily. Kennedy's threat to get rid of Fraser if the engineer kept working against him was not idle mouthing. He could do it, and, being a fanatic, would. But Kennedy, like the demon of legend, would grant one wish, just to salve his own conscience. Only what should that wish be? Another woman? Or merely to be reconciled artificially to an otherwise intolerable situation? Judy, Judy, Judy. Fraser swore at himself. Damn it to hell, this was a problem in logic. No room for emotion. Of course, it might be a problem without a solution. There are plenty of those. He squinted, trying to visualize the office. He thought of burglary, stealing evidence. Silly thought. But let's see now. What was the layout, exactly? 4 suites on one floor of the skyscraper, 3 of them unimportant offices of unimportant men, and... oh Lord. Fraser sat for a long while, hardly moving. Then he uncoiled himself and ran downstairs and into the street and to the nearest payphone. His own line might be tapped. Hello? Hello, Juan? Yes. I know you got out of bed. And I'm not sorry. This is too bloody important. Okay. Look. I want a complete report on the messenger advertising service. When? Immediately, if not sooner. And I mean complete. That's right. Messenger. Okay, fine. I'll buy you a drink sometime. Hello, Jim? Were you asleep too? Sorry. But look, would you make me a list of all the important men you know fairly well? I need it bad. I think I'd better not see you for a while. Just mail it to me, alright? Alright, so I am paranoid. Jerome K. Ferris was a large man with a sense of his own importance that was even larger. He sat hunched in the chair, his head dwarfed by the aluminum helmet, his breathing shallow. Around him danced and flickered 100 meters, indicators, lights, tubes. There was a low humming in the room, otherwise it was altogether silent, blocked and shielded against the outside world. The fluorescent lights were a muted glow. Fraser sat watching the greenish trace on the huge oscilloscope screen. It was an intricate set of convolutions looking more like a plate of spaghetti than anything else. He wondered how many frequencies were involved. Several thousand at the very least. Fraser, repeated Kennedy softly into the ear of the hypnotized man. Colin Fraser. Colin Fraser. He touched a dial with infinite care. Colin Fraser. Colin Fraser. The oscilloscope flickered as he readjusted. A new trace appeared. Kennedy waited for a while, then Robert Kennedy, Sentiment Inc. Robert Kennedy, Sentiment Inc. Robert Kennedy, Sentiment. He turned off the machine. Its murmur and glow died away. Facing Fraser with a tight little smile, he said, "All right. Your job is done. Are we even now?" "As even as we'll ever get, I suppose," said Fraser. "I wish you'd trust me," said Kennedy with a hint of wistfulness. "I'd have done the job honestly. You didn't have to watch." "Well, I was interested," said Fraser. "Frankly, I still don't see what you stand to gain by the dog-like devotion of this Ferris. He's rich, but he's too weak and short-sighted to be a leader. I'd never plan on conditioning him for my purposes." "I've explained that," said Fraser patiently. "Ferris is a large stockholder in a number of corporations. His influence can swing a lot of business my way." "Yes, I know. I didn't grant your wish blindly, you realize. I had Ferris studied. He's unable to harm me." Kennedy regarded Fraser with hard eyes. "And just in case you still have foolish notions, please remember that I gave him the father conditioning with respect to myself. He'll do a lot for you, but not if it's going to hurt me in any way." "I know when I'm licked," said Fraser bleakly. "I'm getting out of town as soon as I finish those courses I'm signed up for." Kennedy snapped his fingers. "All right, Ferris, wake up now." Ferris blinked. "What's been happening?" he asked. "Nothing much," said Kennedy, unbuckling the electrodes. "I've taken my readings. Thank you very much for the help, sir. I'll see that you get due credit when my research is published." "Ah, yes. Ferris puffed himself out. Then he put an arm around Fraser's shoulder. "If you aren't busy," he said, "maybe we could go have lunch." "Thanks," said Fraser. "I'd like to talk to you about a few things." He lingered for a moment after Ferris had left the room. "I imagine this is goodbye for us," he said. "Well, so long at least. We'll probably hear from each other again." Kennedy shook Fraser's hand. "No hard feelings? I did go to a lot of trouble for you, wrangling your introduction to Ferris when you'd named him, and having one of my men persuade him to come here. And right when I'm so infernally busy, too." "Sure," said Fraser. "It's all right. I can't pretend to love you for what you've done, but you aren't a bad sort." "No worse than you," said Kennedy with a short laugh. "You've used the machine for your own ends now." "Yeah," said Fraser. "I guess I have." Swirsky asked, "Why do you insist on calling me from drugstores? And why at my office? I've got a home phone, you know." "I'm not sure, but that our own lines are tapped," said Fraser. "Kennedy's a smart cookie, and don't you forget it. I think he's about ready to dismiss me as a danger, but you're certainly being watched. You're on his list." "You're getting a persecution complex. Honest, Colin. I'm worried." "Well, bear with me for a while. Now, have you had any information on Kennedy since I called last?" No. I did mention to Thompson, as you asked me to, that I'd heard rumors of some revolutionary encephalographic techniques and would be interested in seeing the work. Why did you want me to do that?" "Thompson," said Fraser, "is one of Kennedy's men. Now look, Jim. Before long, you're going to be invited to visit Kennedy. He'll give you a spiel about his research and ask to measure your brain waves. I want you to say yes. Then, I want to know the exact times of the 3 appointments he'll give you, the first 2, at least." If Kennedy's doing what you claim, Jim, it's a necessary risk, but I'm the one who's taking it. You'll be okay, I promise you. Though perhaps later you'll read of me being found in the river. You see, I got Kennedy to influence a big stock owner for me. One of the lesser companies in which he has a loud voice is Messenger. I don't suppose Kennedy knows that. I hope not. Swirsky looked as if he'd been sandbagged. He was white, and the hand that poured the drink shook. "Lord," he muttered. "Lord Colin, you were right. Fraser's teeth drew back from his lips. You went through with it, eh? Yes, I let the sun hypnotize me, and afterward I walked off with a dreamy expression, as you told me to. Just 3 hours ago he dropped around here in person. He gave me a long rigmarole about the stupidity of military secrecy and how the Soviet Union stands for peace and justice. I hope I acted impressed. I'm not much of an actor. You don't have to be, just so you didn't overdo it. To one of Kennedy's victims, obeying his advice is so natural that it doesn't call for any awestruck wonderment. And he wanted data from me. Bombardment cross-sections, critical values, resonance levels. My lord. If the Russians found that out through spies, it'd save them 3 years of research. This is an FBI case, all right. No, not yet. Fraser laid an urgent hand on Swirsky's arm. You've stuck by me so far, Jim. Go along a little further. What do you want me to do? Why, Fraser's laugh jarred out. Give him what he wants, of course. Kennedy looked up from his desk, scowling. All right, Fraser, he said. You've been a damn nuisance, and it's pretty patient of me to see you again. But this is the last time. What do you want? It's the last time I'll need to see you, perhaps. Fraser didn't sit down. He stood facing Kennedy. You've had it, friend. Straight up. What do you mean? Kennedy's hand moved toward his buzzer. Listen before you do anything, said Fraser harshly. I know you tried to bring Jim Swirsky under the influence. You asked him for top-secret data. A few hours ago, you handed the file he brought you on to Bryce, who's no doubt at the Amtorg offices this minute. That's high treason, Kennedy. They execute people for doing that. The psychologist slumped back. Don't try to have your bully boys get rid of me, said Fraser. Swirsky is sitting by on the phone, waiting to call the FBI. I'm the only guy who can stop him. But Kennedy's tongue ran around his lips. But he committed treason himself. He gave me the papers. Fraser grinned. You don't think those were authentic, do you? I doubt if you'll be very popular in the Soviet Union either once they've tried to build machines using your data. Kennedy looked down at the floor. How did you do it? He whispered. Remember Ferris, the guy you fixed up for me? He owns a share of your next-door neighbor, the messenger advertising service. I fed him a song and dance about needing an office to do some important work. Only my very whereabouts had to be secret. The messenger people were moved out without anybody's knowing. I installed myself there one night. Also, a simple little electric oscillator. Encephalography is damn delicate work. It involves amplifications up to several million. The apparatus misbehaves if you give it a hard look. Naturally, your lab and the machine were heavily shielded, but even so, a radio emitter next door would not be bound to throw you off. My main trouble was in lousing you up a little bit, not enough to make you suspect anything. I only worked at that during your calibrating sessions with Swirsky. I didn't have to be there when you turned the beam on him, because it would be calculated from false data and be so far from his pattern as to have no effect. You told me yourself how precious an adjustment was needed. Swirsky played along, then. Now we've got proof. Not that you meddled with human lives, but that you were a spy. Kennedy sat without moving. His voice was a broken mumble. I was going to change the world. I had hopes for all humankind. And you, for the sake of one woman. I never trusted anybody with a messiah complex. The world is too big to change single-handed. You'd just have bungled it up worse than it already is. A lot of dictators started out as reformers and ended up as mass executioners. You'd have done the same. Fraser leaned over his desk. I'm willing to make a deal, though, he went on. Your teeth are pulled. There's no point in turning you in. Swirsky and Martinez and I are willing to just report on Bryce and let you go. if you'll change back all your subjects. We're going to read your files and watch and see that you do it. Every one. Kennedy bit his lip. And the machine? I don't know. We'll settle that later. Okay, Gad. Here's the phone number of Judy Harkness. Ask her to come over for a special treatment. At once. A month later, the papers had a story about a plausible maniac who had talked his way into the Columbia University laboratories where Gavadi's puzzling machine was being studied and pulled out a hammer and smashed it into ruin before he could be stopped. The name was Kennedy. Fraser felt vague regret, but it didn't take him long to forget it. He was too busy making plans for his wedding.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Storywave. If you're stuck on a problem this week, take some time to sit and think about it. Maybe even use your FBI friend